Welcome to our channel, and in this video we will discuss about cloud engineer versus DevOps engineer. We will be seeing some differences and overlaps of tasks and responsibilities of cloud engineer and DevOps engineer both. So let us have a quick introduction about it. Now the topic is DevOps engineer and cloud engineer. There is a lot of mix up between these two roles, and many companies often use them interchangeably. They mix the tasks and responsibilities of these two very often, and there are, for example, plenty of job descriptions for DevOps cloud engineer or cloud DevOps engineer. And whenever you will search for DevOps engineer, you will get the certain tasks and responsibilities of cloud engineer too. So basically all these things are messed up and mixed up, and it is very important to discuss about the differences of cloud engineer and DevOps engineer, and why people mix up these two roles. So first of all, let's start by saying that DevOps and cloud engineer are actually two different roles with different objectives. Reason why people mix up and even use them interchangeably is because they often have many overlapping responsibilities and skills, and also because for new roles companies sometimes have hard times and defining the boundaries between these two roles. You can find them very similar, but there are some basic differences between these two roles. And the topic of this video and the topics we are going to discuss is objectives of DevOps and cloud engineer, what a DevOps engineer does, next is what a cloud engineer does, next is what are the tasks they are assigned to do, and lastly we will see what is that really differentiates them. Okay, what is that thing that really differentiates them and draws a clear line between them. So first of all, DevOps engineer objective. So what is the role? First, let me get one thing out of the way, which as DevOps engineer was actually not meant as a separate role originally. Basically, DevOps is a concept and a set of principles, and different engineer roles like software developer, IT operations, server administrator, and so on were supposed to implement those DevOps practices and principles. So that was the original idea of DevOps. DevOps is basically an idea of software developing. However, the reality now looks different, and these both are different careers, DevOps engineering and cloud engineering. Now, reality looks different with hundreds of thousands of DevOps engineer jobs, which mean it actually evolved into its own engineering role, and yep, it is a very different role. Now, DevOps engineer objective. So DevOps engineer main objective is to make the process of releasing software fast, efficient, without bugs, and even managing that software. If any issues persist, then they have to clear that query or issue, and this is the whole process, and also they have to automate this process. So instead of manual steps of approving the release, testing the application changes, validating that everything works, or making sure that security is configured, so everything like DevSecOps and DevOps, everything is involved in this role, DevOps engineer objectives. Now, what is the cloud engineer objective? So on this other hand, cloud engineer's main objective is to create and manage infrastructure on cloud. There are many web services on cloud like AWS. You will see some Google Cloud services. Okay, so there are many cloud platforms on which we have to create and manage our cloud infrastructure. And now you must be thinking that create and manage cloud infrastructure, what is this? So that sounds very different and not really very clear and specific, because this sentence cannot specify what work cloud engineer objective is and what work cloud engineer is asked to do and what it is expected to do. So let us see the various things of cloud engineers in our next slide. What is the need for cloud engineers? Okay, so there are various cloud platforms. First of all, let us know that we have different cloud platforms, which are basically companies who went and bought a whole bunch of computers, servers, machines, wired up the whole thing, configured the networking, built the data centers with all those machines in different locations, and other companies can now rent those servers for the fraction of cost, like AWS, Kubernetes, and all these things. Okay, Now we have a cloud platform that offer way more than just computer resources like renting a server. You can now get not only your whole infrastructure on cloud, but also a bunch of services on top of that, like database services, storage backups, Docker registries, cache services, managed Kubernetes clusters, and CI/CD on cloud. Okay, so on demand infrastructure is available there, and you can use many other services like AWS. If you see AWS, it is not just like limited resource, it has plenty of services for you, so you can explore that. And if your application needs database services, you can perform that using cloud platforms. Okay, so next thing, there are many AWS services like Elastic IP, Amazon Route 53, Elastic Loading Balancing, Amazon S3, which is basically a notebook, Amazon EBS, AWS Direct Connect, Amazon RDS, Amazon EC2 and VPC. So there are many web services, and it is not only for software development but also for ML, big data processing, mobile development, and so on. There are various things that one can do, and also not only AWS is there, Google Cloud, Azure. So there are very gigantic ones available in the market, but AWS is leading that platform. And what are the specific knowledge which are needed, which is needed, and that is shown in this slide. These platforms provide the same services, but they work very differently, and that is why we need to manage all the things like AWS. In AWS and Microsoft Azure, if you compare them both, they have many similar services, but they work differently because of their different configuration options. You have to configure them separately, and yep, they will work very differently. Like suppose if you instead go for Azure or Google Cloud, or you move away from AWS to one of those platforms, now you have to learn how to use the equivalent service on Azure or Google Cloud, because they work a little bit differently. So every platform has its own service and has its own specification, and you must know all these specification and configurations. But now you need to learn how to use those services and integrate them, because you do not have to start from scratch. You have to learn how to use those services, and you have to integrate all those services to work efficiently. Next is, what is cloud engineer tasks and responsibilities? So first is configuration with best practices. And what is that? When you use services, you don't just configure them so that your application runs on it, everything works and that's it. That's actually not enough. Okay, you need to configure it reliably and securely so that your platform is much secure to use. Okay, and so that your data must not be breached. Next is cloud platform specific knowledge. So cloud platforms are very different, and their services need to be configured, as I said earlier. So you need a specific knowledge of that specific cloud provider to properly configure your infrastructure setup there. This means as a cloud engineer, you usually specialize in one cloud platform and learn how to use their services. That's why we usually say that AWS cloud engineer, because a separate platform have a separate engineer, so that he's specialized in that very platform, like that specified platform, like AWS cloud engineer, Azure cloud engineer, Google cloud engineer. So these are basically some different platforms, and engineers are like allotted, engineers are recruited if they are specialized in that platform only. Okay, next comes cloud migration. So what is that? So cloud migration, moving to cloud can be especially challenging for you, because suppose you have a data in your system and you want to move it to the cloud. So it might be challenging sometimes, or initially it might be challenging. And this use case is, as we all know, more and more companies are moving to the cloud, but many of them aren't starting from scratch, but rather they have an existing on-premise infrastructure and services, so they want to migrate to the cloud. And some are building something from scratch on cloud, and it is often way easier, because what cloud does, cloud provides you a ready-made infrastructure, and you can configure it according to your need. Integrations between local and cloud infrastructure is done. Many companies need these integration. Many companies also do multi-cloud, which means that they use Azure, AWS, And maybe for redundancy, like if something happens to one AWS data center, you have a fallback. Like suppose if you are using only AWS, and suppose if its services are not working appropriately at one time, so if you are working on multi-cloud, then you can switch your options if one is not working efficiently or properly for you. So you must have some options, and this multi-cloud is a very good option to work on. Next is cost tracking and optimization. So this cost tracking, what is this cost tracking? Because when you use many resources, many cloud services, combine them in various ways, you need to watch out for the cost, or at least be able to predict that how much your movement will cost you and how much it is worth of. Because sometimes when you move to the cloud, you should know that how much it is charging you. Like EC2 instance, whenever we create EC2 instance, or we are using suppose RDS, that is database. So whenever you are using, you must have a cost tracking so that you can judge whether it is efficient for you, it is in budget for you or not. Next is what is differences between DevOps and cloud engineer. Okay, so differences. Now DevOps and cloud engineer. Now going back to the original comparison between DevOps engineer and cloud engineer to summarize the differences. The DevOps engineer automates the software release process and to make it faster. Basically, they are called software engineers. They implement, they test, they build package, they have to deploy it to dev, they have to deploy it to test, they have to release the project in the market, and they have to automate software release process. Like they work on agile methodologies, all these things. And what is cloud engineer? They have to automate cloud infrastructure, and they have to look for security, reliability, and scalability. And what are the overlaps between these two? What are the works on which they work like simultaneously? So that is management, monitoring, secure, scalability, and infrastructure things. So DevOps engineer job would extend to managing the underlying infrastructure, monitoring that is working fine so that application can be deployed and run successfully, making sure that it's secure, it's not running out of resources, that it's geographically distributed, and so on. If application is running in Kubernetes cluster managed by AWS, or DevOps engineer would make sure the cluster is running fine or not. Okay, so they work there are some points on they work simultaneously, they both can work. And lastly, there is the thing when they both work like hand in hand, DevOps and cloud engineer when working together. So the objective of cloud engineer, which is reliable, secure infrastructure, also affects the DevOps engineer objective of releasing application fast because they have to run on that infrastructure, which means that cloud engineer takes care of the infrastructure and DevOps engineer builds something on the process of top of that. Suppose cloud engineer provides you the base foundation, and on that a building of application is made by DevOps engineer. So that was our video, and I hope now you can difference between these two streams, cloud engineer and DevOps engineer. And if you like this video, share it to your friends and hit the like button. Thank you.